Tony, spring's here, whether we're ready or not.
Yes, spring is here. I mean, we only have to look at the weather we've had over the last week or so. We've had a couple of amazing days. Another amazing day today, even though we're sitting inside. But we've suddenly started to get some really warm temperatures. And interestingly enough, Philip Duncan was on the radio yesterday talking about early spring, and the signs are there. Daffodils are there, lambing is well underway. Calves are dropping all over the place, and we know that it is early for them. So early calves, early milking, early processing, and so I know that he said on the radio yesterday that Fonterra had been forewarned about this, and it's come to roost. And for us in particular, that first part of August for us is a key time. We know from some of our continuous monitoring sites that we have already got a soil moisture deficit, albeit quite small. It insidiously starts to catch up on us.
It'll get bigger.
It'll get bigger. Day length is starting to go out. I mean, people notice that quite quickly. But that insidious catch up, it might only be a half a millimetre a day or slightly less, but suddenly after a week or 10 days of low rainfall or no rainfall and warm temperatures, then that deficit starts to develop. So for us, that early part of August is a key time for us to start getting out and getting some measurements done so that we get a more widespread perspective of where soil moisture levels are at.
And I guess a week of nor'westers and you're in drought.
Yeah, a week of nor'westers, probably not so much at this time of the year. I mean, the day lengths are still quite controlling at this time of the year. We still don't have lots and lots of day length. We're over that 12-hour period, but a week of nor'westers, and especially if they are associated with temperatures like we've had recently, 19s and 20 degrees, and we get a week of those sort of nor'westers, then it will certainly start cranking up the soil moisture deficit.
Tony, you monitor some very deep ones, and you said that they were looking absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, the very deep bores, in particular, the groundwater levels in the deeper bores, sort of things that are 80 metres and deeper, in the mid-plains particularly. Yep, they haven't shown any major signs of significant recovery still. So we look like we're going into the spring we will be in the spring with water levels much lower than they were in 2014.
Yeah,
going into the 2014-15 season. So going into the 2015-16 season, we're going to start with much lower water levels. Not quite so noticeable in the shallower bores, so anything that's quite shallow. But people need to keep that in mind as well, that spring is really close. Irrigation season is closer than probably further away, and they need to start having some considerations now about what could happen later in the season if water levels really plummet and we do get a really dry season.
I know you were very against putting water on when it's not necessarily needed. It's your pet hate.
Yep.
But there's some people transplanting cabbages and broccoli and things, and it's too dry for them to pick up.
Oh, look, you only have to go and talk to some of the growers, some of our clients, for example, that are on the shallower soils, and they're working paddocks, and it's not as wet as they thought it was. They're tipping that over, and as soon as you cultivate the soil, particularly when we've got 19 or 20 degrees, then you dry that soil out very quickly. And when you transplant brassicas in particularly, which have a very low threshold temperature for growth, they'll grow at temperatures much lower than that 10 degrees C, which is often the base temperature. Then they will be transpiring on those days. They have a very shallow root system to start with, and to get them to get up and get smoking, they need some water to get going.
Now,
which is it's sort of against everybody's thought that this is the time to be irrigating. But if you want them to establish and start growing, then you need to supply some water in that top 10 centimetres of the profile.
Yeah. The question you don't want me to ask, but are we likely to be facing restrictions?
It's probably a little bit early to make that call. There's a reasonable snowpack, so the rivers, the big rivers in particular, they will flow quite well in the spring. So the likes of the Rakaias and the Waimakarieris and the Waias, those sorts of rivers, they'll be well supplied going into the spring with snowmelt. And if we do have a typically El Nino type spring, then we can expect the west coast to be wetter than the east coast, which means that we should get some spillover rainfall into those headwater catchments. And we've seen that already in the last week, that places like Hokitika and Franz Josef and those sort of places. And if you go into the North Island as well, if you go into the Tararuas and the Rimatakas, they got substantial rainfalls in the last week, which means that those east-flowing rivers, their flows are relatively high. So if we continue on with that typically El Nino type weather, then we'll get pretty good rainfalls. The ones that are of concern are those foothill rivers. I mean, they're not all flowing at the moment. If you fly over the Selwyn River, for example, it doesn't have water at the main road. So
yeah, and it should have this time of year.
And at this time of the year, we should have a substantial flow coming down there, which is a very good indicator of sort of how dry it is. And in fact, I went over the Ashley on the weekend, and it too doesn't have a substantial flow in it.
So North Island.
North Island's is in pretty good shape. The Hawke's Bay is still pretty wet. They've been getting quite a bit more rain than what the northern part of Canterbury in particular has had, and some parts of inland South Canterbury are particularly dry. But certainly the North Island has had a much better rainfall over this winter than we've had in parts of Canterbury.
And what about their reserves? Because they don't get much snow melt off those three hills.
That's true. Their reserves are in pretty good shape. I mean, if you go into places like the Heritonga Plains, for example, their groundwater levels are relatively high. The rivers have been high enough. They get a lot of recharge out of the rivers to those aquifers, and they're looking in pretty good shape for the coming spring.
So it's really Canterbury and Marlborough, I guess.
Marlborough and North Canterbury in particular are the real concern areas at the moment, particularly in terms of groundwater supplies. Surface water, as I said, looks like it'll be in pretty good shape coming into the spring. And hopefully if the nor'westers keep coming, while they're great for supplying some rainfall and therefore river flows, they're not so great for those that don't have water, unfortunately.
And of course, there's been very little growth.
If you go into the North Canterbury and the Marlborough area in particular, there wasn't sufficient autumn rainfall to actually kick anything into gear. So when you have cold temperatures over the winter, then nothing is growing. We don't have anything that can fire into gear immediately. The really warm spring temperatures come, even though we've got some moisture back into parts of the profile. So there's very little to actually kick into gear when the spring actually arrives.
Tony, we'll keep monitoring if we may. Thank you very much indeed.